Have you ever wondered how a poor village boy could rise to become a great king? In today's African folktale, you will hear the inspiring story of a young boy who had nothing but courage, kindness, and determination. Despite many hardships and challenges, he never gave up on his dreams. His journey would eventually change his life forever and teach an important lesson about perseverance and character. If you enjoy African folktales with powerful life lessons, be sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications for more amazing stories. Now let us begin this remarkable tale. Long, long ago in the heart of Africa, there was a small village called Obrafour. The village sat near a wide red river, under the shade of tall mango trees. The houses were made of brown mud and dried grass. The people of Obrafour were simple and good. They grew yams and cassava in the red earth. They fished in the river. They sang songs at night under the stars. But not everyone in Obrafour was happy. Not everyone had enough to eat, and no one knew more about hunger than a little boy named Kofi. Kofi lived with his mother, Mama Abena, in the smallest hut at the edge of the village. Their hut had a hole in the roof where the rain came in. They had only one sleeping mat and 2 clay bowls. Their fire was small because they had little wood. Every morning, Kofi woke up before the sun and went to the river to fetch water. Every evening, he helped his mother pound yam even though his arms were thin and tired. They did not have much, but Mama Abena always smiled. She always told Kofi, "My son, a poor hand does not mean a poor heart." Kofi's father had died 2 rains ago. He had been a great carver of wood. Before he died, he gave Kofi a small wooden lion he had carved with his own hands. The lion does not ask the jungle for permission to be great, his father had told him, pressing the tiny lion into Kofi's palm. "You are my son. One day you will be great too." Kofi kept that little wooden lion close to his heart every single day. When he was sad, he held it. When he was scared, he squeezed it. It was the most important thing he owned in the whole world. The village of Obrafour was ruled by a king named King Asante Bofo. He lived in a large palace made of stone and painted white. His palace had many servants and big rooms filled with gold, but King Asante Bofo was not a good king. He was greedy and cruel. Every harvest season, he sent his soldiers to take food from the poor villagers. He took the biggest yams, the fattest fish, and the sweetest mangoes. He left the people with barely enough to survive. The children of Obrafour went to sleep hungry many nights because of this king. One dry season, the rains did not come. The river dropped low. The crops turned brown and died in the fields. The mango trees gave no fruit. The fish hid deep where no net could reach. The people of Obrafour grew more and more hungry. Mothers boiled leaves just to give their children something warm. Old men sat under trees and closed their eyes for long, long hours. Even the animals were thin. And still the king's soldiers came. Still they took. Kofi watched one morning as a soldier snatched the last bunch of plantains from an old grandmother's hands. The old woman sat in the dust and wept. Something inside Kofi burned like fire. That night, Kofi could not sleep. He lay on his mat and stared up at the hole in the roof. The stars looked back at him. "Why does the king take from people who have nothing?" he whispered to the wooden lion in his hand. The lion said nothing, of course, but something in Kofi's chest whispered back. It said, "Change must begin with someone." "Why not you?" Kofi closed his eyes. He did not yet know what he could do. He was only a poor, thin boy with a torn cloth and no shoes. But the fire inside him did not go out. That fire would one day change everything. The next morning, before the sun came up, Kofi went to the forest to collect firewood as usual. But that morning, deep inside the forest where the trees grew tall as mountains, he heard a sound. A soft, gentle sound, like humming, like a song that had no beginning and no end. He followed the sound carefully, stepping over roots and ducking under branches. The air in that part of the forest smelled like rain and sweet flowers, even though the land was dry. And then, sitting on a large flat rock in a small clearing, he saw her. It was an old woman, but not just any old woman. She was very, very old. Older than any elder Kofi had ever seen in the village. Her silver-white hair was braided into tiny plaits. Her skin was deeply wrinkled like the bark of an ancient baobab tree. And her eyes were the strangest and most beautiful eyes Kofi had ever seen. They were deep brown, but with a ring of gold around them, like the sun sitting at the edge of the earth. She wore a cloth of green, purple, and gold and held a carved wooden staff. She was humming softly and did not look surprised to see Kofi at all. "I have been waiting for you, Kofi," the old woman said, without turning around. Kofi stopped walking. His heart jumped. "How do you know my name?" he asked. The old woman turned slowly and smiled. Her smile was wide and warm like the morning sun breaking over a hill. "I know many things," she said softly. "I know that your father was a great man. I know that your mother works until her hands bleed. I know that you watched an old woman cry in the dust yesterday, and instead of walking away, your heart burned." She pointed a long, bony finger at his chest. "That fire you carry inside you, that is not ordinary fire. Kofi, that is the fire of a king." What to say? He sat down on the rock beside the old woman. She told him her name was Nana Yawa. She said she was the keeper of an ancient wisdom. She had lived in this forest longer than the oldest tree. She told him that every generation a child was born in the land with a special gift. Not the gift of wealth, not the gift of beauty. The gift of seeing. The ability to look at a broken thing and know how to fix it. The ability to look at a suffering person and truly feel their pain. This gift, she said, is the only gift that can make a great king. Then Nana Yawa gave Kofi 3 things. First, she gave him a small seed. It was a dark brown seed, no bigger than a thumb. "Plant this in the driest part of the earth," she said. "It will grow into something that will feed your whole village." Second, she gave him a copper cup. It was old and dull, with tiny carvings of animals on its side. "Fill this from any river," she said, "and it will never run dry." Third, she said, "Go to the palace. Ask to see the king. Tell him the truth, not with anger but with courage. These are your 3 tests." Kofi held the seed and the cup carefully. His hands trembled. He was afraid. But he nodded. Kofi ran home with the seed and the copper cup tucked safely against his body. Mama Abena was awake, grinding grain with tired hands. She looked up when she saw him and asked what he was carrying. Kofi told her everything, the forest, the old woman, the seed, and the cup. Mama Abena's eyes went wide. Then she was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled Kofi into a tight hug and held him for a long time. He could feel her tears on his neck. "Your father always said you were different," she whispered. He was right. She let him go and wiped her eyes. "Go, my son. Do not be afraid." First, Kofi planted the seed. He went to the edge of the village where the earth was the driest and the hardest. The other children laughed at him. "You are planting in dead ground, foolish boy," they shouted. Old men shook their heads. "Nothing grows in that cracked earth," they said. But Kofi dug a small hole with his bare hands, placed the seed inside, and poured just a little water over it from the copper cup. Then he waited. By the time the sun was directly overhead, small green shoots had pushed up through the cracked earth. By sunset, a green vine with broad leaves spread across the ground. The laughing children went quiet. Within 3 days, the vine had grown into a massive tree. Its roots spread wide and deep. Its branches reached high. It was covered in heavy golden fruit, a fruit no one in the village had ever seen before. It was soft and sweet and filling. One fruit was enough to make a grown man full for a whole day. Kofi shared every fruit with every family in the village. He gave to the old grandmother who had been robbed. He gave to the mothers with crying babies. He gave to the old men sitting under the trees. No one was told to pay. No one was turned away. Word began to spread through Obrafour. The boy Kofi had brought life to dead ground. News reached the king's palace. King Asante Bofo did not like what he heard. He did not like that a poor boy was becoming respected in the village. He did not like the idea of the people having food he had not taxed. He summoned his head soldier. "Bring me this boy," the king growled, his fat fingers drumming on the arm of his throne. "I want to see this boy who thinks he can play at being important." The soldier bowed and left. 2 days later, Kofi was brought to the palace gates. His feet were bare on the cold stone path. His heart was beating fast, but his hand was around the wooden lion and his chin was up. Inside the throne room, King Asante Bofo sat in all his finery. Gold everywhere, silk banners on the walls, servants fanning him with large palm leaves. He looked down at Kofi the way a vulture looks at a small mouse. "So," the king said with a fat smile, "you are the boy who grew a magic tree." Kofi stood straight. "Yes, great king," he answered. His voice was steady, though his knees shook inside. The king's eyes narrowed. "Give me the seed so I can grow 1,000 trees on my palace grounds," the king said. "And bring me that cup so my rivers never dry." It was not a request. It was a command. Kofi breathed deeply. Then he spoke. "Great king," he said, his voice growing stronger, "I cannot give you the seed or the cup. Not because I do not respect you, but because these gifts were given to serve the hungry, not to make the full even fuller. If I gave you these things, the people of Obrafor would suffer again." A shocked silence fell over the throne room. No servant moved. No fan swayed. The king's face turned red with fury. No one, not a soldier, not an elder, not a chief, had ever spoken to him this way. "You dare?" the king bellowed. His voice shook the gold cups on the table. The king ordered Kofi thrown into the palace dungeon. It was a dark, cold room under the ground with thick stone walls and no windows. There were rats and spiders. The smell was like wet earth and old fear. Kofi sat in the corner and held his wooden lion to his chest. He thought of his mother. He thought of the old woman in the forest. He thought of what she had said. Tell him the truth, not with anger, but with courage. These are your 3 tests. He had passed 2 tests. The tree, the truth. Now, in the dark, he waited for the 3rd. But Kofi was not alone for long. Late that night, a soft light appeared under the cell door. Then the door swung open, not by any soldier, but all on its own. Standing there in the torchlight was a young girl. She was about 12 years old. She had braided hair decorated with cowrie shells and golden beads, and she wore a white and gold dress. She had gentle, curious eyes, and she was holding a clay lamp. She looked at Kofi carefully. "You are the boy who spoke truth to my father," she said quietly. "I am Adesua. I am the king's daughter." Adesua sat down on the dungeon floor beside Kofi. She did not care that her fine dress might get dirty. "I heard everything you said to my father," she whispered. "You were right. I have watched him take from the people for years. I have cried at night because of what I see." She paused. "I want to help you. My father has a sickness of the heart. He was not always cruel. Something made him hard and greedy. But I believe he can still be reached." Kofi looked at her. He saw in her eyes the same fire he carried inside himself. Not anger, not hatred, just deep burning love for people who were suffering. Adesua led Kofi through a secret tunnel behind the dungeon wall. A passage her grandmother had shown her long ago. They came out in the royal garden where tall trees and old flowers grew. The night sky above was enormous and full of stars. Kofi breathed in the clean air. But instead of running away, as Adesua expected, Kofi stopped walking. He turned back toward the palace. "I am not finished," he said. Adesua blinked. "You want to go back in?" she asked. Kofi nodded slowly. "Not to fight, to try one more time." Nana Yawa said to speak the truth with courage. Not once, but for as long as it takes. The next morning, Kofi walked into the throne room again, but this time he was not alone. Behind him walked Adesua. The king stood up from his throne in shock. Then he saw his daughter's face, and something cracked in his chest. She had never defied him before. She had always been quiet, always obedient, but now she stood beside the poor boy and looked at her. Father with eyes full of love and full of pain. "Father," Adesua said softly, "this boy speaks what I have been afraid to say. The people are starving because of us. Please, listen to him." Something broke inside King Asante Bofo. His shoulders dropped. His heavy crown suddenly seemed too heavy. He lowered himself slowly back onto his throne. But this time his body was bent, not proud. His eyes moved from his daughter to the boy, to the poor, thin, barefoot boy with the wooden lion who had come back. Not to attack, not to beg, just to speak. The king's throat tightened. He thought of the day many years ago when he himself had been a poor boy. He had been hungry once, too. He had promised himself that one day he would have enough. But somewhere along the way, enough had turned into more, and more had turned into all, and all had turned him into a monster. The king wept. It was an ugly, broken kind of crying. The kind that happens when a proud man finally lets something go that he has been holding for far too long. His soldiers looked at the ground. His servants turned away. Adesua sat beside her father and held his hand. And Kofi, the poor boy with the torn cloth and no shoes, walked closer and knelt before the king, not because he was afraid, but because he saw a suffering man and his heart always moved toward suffering. "It is not too late, great king," Kofi said quietly. "The people will forgive. They always do. They just need you to choose them." The king chose the people. He sent his soldiers, not to take but to give. The royal granaries were opened. Food was carried into every street of Obrafour. The copper cup was brought to the village, river and placed on a stone, where all could draw from it. The magical tree Kofi had grown was declared a gift for all, never to be taxed, never to be taken. The king also made a new law. No one in the kingdom would be allowed to take food from those who had less than enough, and he invited the village elders to come to the palace and speak freely about what the people needed. Years passed, Kofi grew. The king grew older and kinder. The village of Obrafour grew into a prosperous town. People came from far away to trade, to learn, and to share. And through those years, Kofi never forgot the forest, or the old woman or the wooden lion. He studied hard. He listened to the elders. He sat with the farmers and learned the earth. He sat with the fishermen and learned the river. He helped heal arguments. He helped build wells. He made enemies into friends simply by listening to them until they felt understood. Mama Abina's hut was replaced with a strong stone house, and she slept on a soft mat and never went hungry again. When Kofi was 18 years old, King Asante Bofo fell very ill. The healers said he would not last the dry season. The king sent for Kofi. Kofi came, now a tall and serious young man who carried himself with quiet grace. The old king held his hand and said, "I have watched you all these years, boy. I have watched what you do with no power, no wealth, no title. I can only imagine what you would do with all three." He paused to catch his breath. Then he said, "I have no son. I have only my Adesua, who already loves you like a brother." The old king looked at Adesua, then back at Kofi. "Will you be the father to this kingdom that I failed to be?" Kofi was silent for a long time. He looked down at the wooden lion in his palm, the same lion his father had given him all those years ago. He thought of the thin boy who had slept on a mat with a hole above, him looking at the stars. He thought of Nana Yawa and her gold-ringed eyes. He thought of Mama Abena's voice saying, "Go, my son. Do not be afraid." He thought of the old grandmother sitting in the dust after her plantains were taken. He thought of every face that had ever looked at him with hope, with hunger, with need. And then he closed his fingers around the wooden lion and looked up at the old king. "Yes," Kofi said, "I will try." King Asante Bofo died peacefully 7 days later, with his daughter's hand in his and a small smile on his face. The whole kingdom mourned him, not for the cruel king he had been, but for the changed man he had become. He had proven in his final years that people can grow, that it is never truly too late. And when the time of mourning passed, the elders of Obrafour, the chiefs of the neighboring villages, and the people themselves gathered in the great square under the ancient baobab tree. They spoke with one voice. There was no argument. There was no fighting. The choice was clear to everyone. On the day of the coronation, the sky was the brightest blue it had ever been. Birds filled the trees. Drums played from before sunrise to after sunset. Women sang in voices so beautiful that people said the ancestors themselves had come to listen. Mama Abina stood in the front row in a new dress, deep blue and gold, with her hands pressed together under her chin and tears running freely down her face. Kofi walked to the great platform under the baobab tree. He was dressed in a golden royal robe with red and black kente cloth patterns. Around his neck, the wooden lion rested against his chest. On his head, an ivory and gold crown was placed by the oldest elder. King Kofi was not like other kings. He did not sit far away from his people behind high walls. Every week he walked through the market. He listened to the farmers. He sat with the sick. He fixed what was broken. He built schools under the trees so every child could learn. He dug wells so no one had to walk far for water. He made sure food reached every home before harvest season ended. He never forgot what it felt like to be hungry. He never forgot what it felt like to be ignored. And because of that, he never let it happen to others while he had power to stop it. One afternoon, Kofi walked alone to the forest. He had not been back since that morning long ago when he was a frightened, hungry boy. The trees were tall and cool and smelled like rain and flowers. He followed the path by memory until he reached the small clearing with the flat, moss-covered rock. He sat down where he had sat as a child. He waited. For a long while, nothing happened. And then on the breeze, he heard it. A soft humming, a song with no beginning and no end. He smiled. He placed the wooden lion gently on the rock beside him. "Thank you, Nana Yawa," he said quietly to the air. The humming seemed to grow warmer, seemed to smile back. The moral of the story: greatness is not built from gold or power. It is built from the courage to speak truth, the humility to serve others, and the heart that never forgets what it felt like to have nothing. The poorest boy in the village became the greatest king, not because of magic, but because he never let suffering make him selfish, and he never let power make him forget.